And Sulakshana, it's great to have you with us today on this, very, very interesting topic of customer excellence and what role ops plays in contributing towards that. I think before, we start off, of course, we've done a bunch of things to let the community know who you are, what you've done, all of those things. But it would absolutely be great to, understand a little bit more from you about what your journey has been. So maybe we could start with a quick introduction, a little bit of background about yourself before we jump right into the session.
Sure. It's great to be here. Thanks, Rohit Jogata, for inviting me here today. Let me just talk a little bit about myself. So I started my career as a designer. So I actually studied as a designer from NIFT. I worked as a designer for a little bit. Then I went on to IIM Bangalore to do an MBA. That's a hard shift, I know, and sometimes it's a little hard to explain. But I felt like I didn't want to be a designer all my life, so I decided to do an MBA. Aside from after my MBA, I actually joined Carney. Worked there as a consultant for 2 years. Then after that, I got my first ops experience actually when I joined a company called D Decor, which does home furnishing fabrics. I actually helped set up their retail division over about a period of 3 years. Um, Post that, I've started up failed, did that for a bit. Then in about 2018, I joined the Flipkart group. So I joined Myntra. Diverse experiences there. I started actually in customer experience strategy, then went on to be chief of staff to the CEO, and then handled revenue for all categories at Myntra. At Flipkart, then I moved. I did a similar revenue management role for mobiles. So I was leading demand generation and planning, revenue planning for mobiles. This year, I moved on from Flipkart. I am now currently the chief operating officer for a D2C brand called Traya. We work in the hair fall and hair loss space. Um, this is interestingly a culmination of all my experiences, right? So I think one of the things we spoke about as we were discussing this chat is also what is operations, and I think that it's very hard to define. And what for me here in Traya's operations is actually managing supply chain, managing a large team of coaches who actually coach the customer through their treatment journeys, and retention revenue. So here, experience and revenue are literally the same at the same point, right? Where we believe that doing the right thing by the customer is what is going to lead us a retention revenue. So, kind of operations and revenue, actually, the same person is responsible for both. So I think it's quite kind of a reflection of what I believe customer experience is truly. So that's just a bit about myself and my career
Uh,
trajectory.
thank you so much. It's absolutely brilliant to follow your journey, and you worked at some of the largest startups, and now you're leading what is arguably a very, very interesting early stage startup that everyone's been talking about for at least quite some time now in the hair care space. So I think the community here is going to benefit a lot, from this multiplicity of experiences that you had seeing things. And I know we were discussing that as things move more and more, sort of digital, it's almost as if building a product, delivering the product, selling the product, all of that is happening in one go, and it's really hard to separate the company who makes something from the retailer who distributes something, right, to the logistics partner who delivers it. It's almost one seamless experience, right? So it's becoming even more and more important to hold that. So maybe with that piece, right, we should jump into the first part of this conversation, right, which is how do we sort of think about what customer experience is. It'd be helpful to understand from you a little bit, and we do this for all of the different sessions, is to get a little bit of a definition on how do you define customer experience, customer success. And I thought that it might be fundamentally different today than it has been in the past, but would be great to get your perspective on what has changed and why it's all the more important to take care of CX today.
Right? For me, customer experience is the other side of the marketing promise, right? which is what is it that you are promising to the customer? Are you delivering on it, and are you exceeding their expectations rather than over promising and under delivering, right? And honestly, CX is not a function. It can be a monitoring function. Of course, there are CX monitoring functions in organizations, but truly CX has to be delivered by every part of the organization, right? Think talking about in the digital world, has it changed? Honestly, with my definition, it doesn't, because conceptually it still remains the same, right? Earlier, you said that this product will stop dandruff in 20 days. Let's imagine how brands used to make promises, right? Now, if you delivered on that promise, you delivered great customer expectation. If you didn't, you didn't. Offline, you would say store experience, right? Like, how would you, if you went into a retail store, was the experience good? Were you treated well? Was the ambience good? Today, you would say it's platform experience, all the things which Rishika spoke about, right? Again, offline you would say availability, online you would say selection. So I don't think that what customer experience truly or conceptually is has changed a lot. It's just that how it manifests has definitely changed. What we call the different things has definitely changed. And how you measure it, and we'll talk about that I think a little bit as we go along, is also something which is changing, right? So yeah, for me it's delivery on promise, right? And that's how I look at how to keep customers happy and satisfied. The next step is customer delight, which also some folks spoke about, which is how do you go over and above and create delight is the next step. But for me, the foundation of it is sticking to your promise.
And Sulakshana, maybe looking at this, right? Previously, a brand had to make a product, it had to deliver on the promise. Now, in the digital age, you have to deliver on the buying experience. You have to deliver on the delivery experience. You have to deliver
Yeah,
on the payment experience, right? You have to deliver on
yeah.
the returns experience. So maybe my question was, are there now more promises that a brand has to potentially deliver on beyond just the core product, which is where ops and the kind of work that you and your teams have been doing throughout all of these three different businesses is becoming all the more critical. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what are some of these factors or different aspects of customer experience today that, contribute towards shaping a brand, and
Yeah,
how you think about that.
I think different factors today, and I'll speak a bit more from a retailer perspective, right? Because that's the perspective that I have. Just like Rishika said, it's episodes, right? Which is what are the different ways in which you can break a customer journey and kind of look at what the experience is in each part of the journey, right? And it starts from the time they download the app till the time they use the product. So typically, four or five episodes, depending on the type of business model there is. There will be the time when they come in. Is their onboarding journey good? Is their platform experience good? Right now, if your promise to the customer is that you will have widest selection, do you factually actually have the widest selection? That becomes a point of customer experience, right? Then the next comes the delivery experience. So you promise the customer that you will deliver it in the next 2 days. Did you deliver it in the next 2 days? The next part comes the returns experience, right? You said you would pick it up in the next 3 days. Did the customer get the refund? um, and honestly, these are problems which have been well solved by the larger platforms. But if you see in the D2C space, there's still, while there are a lot of third party providers, that portion of the experience is actually not fully solved. There's a lot of return hassle, there's a lot of breakage point in the return experience. Then the contact center, where if you are calling and you say your query should be resolved in the next 2 days, is it resolved in the next 2 days? And usage experience, is the product of good quality, right? Which is, like you said, Rohit, probably one of the key aspects of customer experience before. Though I would still argue that there were different touch points, they were just called differently. Like today, I would call it a delivery experience because there's a supply chain team who's delivering it from warehouse to home. But then I would have called it a checkout experience at the retail store, right? Is the line very long? Is the operation working seamlessly? Did they have change for me to make the payment smoothly, right? So that's why I said The concept of episodes remains the same. The episodes may be different. I don't think that it is more or less than before. I just think that they are different from before. Scrutiny is of course higher, right? And the way in which bad experiences can spiral out of hand is definitely a lot more today than it was before, just because of the internet and social media. I sound like an old person.
No, got it, got it. Thank you. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
To get that that sort of context. And
Hmm.
if you were to sort of start, now looking into, now that we've established the foundation, the base, of this conversation and the context here, and I think everyone's also had a chance to get some of what they wanted to say out. Let's start looking right at operations X customer success, right? So maybe the first question to you is, all of these things, right, such as operations efficiency, delivering things on time, the supply chain experience being good, and really a lot of the stuff that you have to do in the back end, right, to ensure that all of these points of customer delight are delivered as promised. What is the role that you see of operations playing in this, right? So product, manufacturing, marketing, all of that is one very, very important part. But then somebody has to actually do and deliver on top of all of these things. So it would be helpful to get some perspective from you on what role, as an overarching sort of concept, before we get into the more specific questions and examples of,
Yeah.
why is ops important for customer
I
experience?
think Rohit, you answered my question, right? It's like we ops are the people who are actually delivering things to the customer. I think that in the new age space, especially, I think um, what gets a lot of focus is growth, and where growth is coming from, where user growth is coming from, where revenue growth is coming from. But the core of it always remains that the growth is coming, but it's coming because it's getting delivered, right? Someone is manufacturing the product, someone is delivering the products, and that's what operations does. Now, I'll give you an example, right? And sometimes it's very esoteric to imagine that you are working on a certain part of operations somewhere in the back end, and how is it that I'm affecting the customer, right? I'll take an example of, say, a first mile delivery, right? The vendor is shipping out the products, the delivery is happening to the warehouses. Now, how does this connect to customer experience? So I think at any whatever part of the organization that you are in, you can draw the line which leads you to how you are impacting customer experience, right? So for this particular example that I'm picking up, what we're trying, how do you affect customer experience? The When a customer places the order, the products need to be in the warehouse closest to them. If it is at the warehouse closest to them, then they are going to get faster delivery, and then they are going to also, the breaches on deliveries will be lesser. So the role here is actually not of the outbound supply chain, right? It is actually of inbound, to make sure that the allocations are right, it is as per the trends of sales, so that the customer is able to get their products quickly. Now, the other upshot of this is, uh, thankfully, in this particular case, it costs less also to do this. That would not be the case in all customer experience initiatives. But in this case, it also costs less, which means that it is more efficient to distribute your products in that manner. But it is also directly impacting customer experience, because A, they have availability in their closest warehouse. B, they have the time which it takes to deliver these products is also lesser, right? So similarly, I think whatever portion or whatever piece of you are working on in operations or any other part of the org, I think drawing that line to customer experience is possible. And in 70 to 80% of the cases, you will find that doing that job well and efficiently will lead to better customer experience.
Got it. Got it. Super, super helpful. And you were saying that the sort of touch points with the customer have now increased. There are different ways and forms for customers to give feedback to you. Sometimes they can spiral out of control. So maybe, talking a little bit more about that, right? Like, how does the operations team understand what they need to do to deliver on customer experience, right? Like this aspect that you alluded to in the beginning of the call, which was the measurement part of it, right? Like, how do you really go about understanding the customer's needs, the pain points, and then sort of think about, building the systems and the processes to deliver on top of? be a little bit helpful to understand how
Yeah,
brands and companies are doing it today.
absolutely. NPS is traditionally one of the metrics which you consider from a customer satisfaction perspective. It is and other survey methodologies, right? Slightly unpopular opinion. I believe that NPS is a great overall health metric, but doesn't actually provide the right insights in today's world to actually improve customer experience. One part being exactly what Rohit said, right? Which is what customers say and what they do are completely different things. Which is why in FMCG you actually do usage studies to understand brand loyalty on top of actually doing interviews and quantitative studies, because when you actually go through someone's home and their trash, you find out that they're using products which are very different from what they say they are, right? So that's one aspect. The second is that NPS also as a methodology was developed when data was scarce. So it was developed sometime in the early 2000s, like 2002, 2003, when the kind of data which we have right now was unheard of, right? The ability to track a unique customer did not exist. Like I would know at today at any point in time I will know that this customer of mine has visited me x number of times in the last 3 months or purchased from me last twice the last 2 months, etc., right? That kind of data was just not available, so the next best thing is to do is to ask the customers and then figure out what are the satisfaction problems, right? And whether they would come back or not. But now you can track whether they're coming back or not. So some of the metrics which folks spoke about on the call, retention for me is the topmost metric, right? You can say that there are a lot of other factors impacting retention, but I believe that structural improvement in retention is the best measurement for customer experience. Engagement is the second one, which is that are they actually engaging with you? But that tells you a little bit more about how good your platform experience is, right? Which is whether you are engaging the customer or not. But at an overall level, I think retention is probably the best metric which we can measure. And today it's possible to measure, right? um, all actions for customer experience improvement, irrespective of whether they cost money now or they are actually cost beneficial now, it could be either, should impact customers' LTV. And that for me is the core of how you measure. The second portion is there's always input metrics to customer experience, right? And we spoke about promises. We said that you are promising certain things to the customer. For example, you say that you are going to be lowest price, right? That's the promise or the proposition you've made to the customer. Then tracking those input metrics is also very important. So you say that I will do a once in a week or a once in a month sort of understanding to say that do I actually have the lowest price as I am promising to the customer. And lowest price doesn't necessarily mean that you have one product at a 50 rupees, right? It's like, do I have a meaningful selection at the lowest price? Am I delivering on that lowest price promise to the customer? Again, another metric, input metric could be, you could say that I have, like, one of the biggest problems I face with Prime, right? And it's an implicit promise, which is that Prime gives you next day delivery is sort of the overarching promise that you have. Not taking away from Amazon, I think that one of the most customer centric companies. But what has happened over the years in India, I think that it was true when it started, but what has happened now is the percentage of products which are actually available to me on next day delivery has been constantly reducing, right? So the measurement of that metric would tell you whether you are doing well on customer experience or not, the promises you've made and the metrics you need to track to deliver on those promises.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now having some of this context on what is CX, why is it important, right? How do you measure it? Maybe we should also talk a little bit about how do you do some of these things, right? What is it that ops can do in small increments, in large projects, transformations, maybe from your career and your experiences, about where ops has really, really played a role in delivering customer experience. And how do you sort of mechanize some of these different things that we spoke about would be great to
Sure.
understand.
Actually, just to go back to the previous question as well, right? I think I spoke a little bit more only on the quantitative measurements or the metrics aspect of it. And the survey methodologies do have one advantage, is that they actually take qualitative feedback from customers, right? Because behaviors only give you statistics, they do not give you the whys. So what NPS tries to answer in a lot of ways is to understand what and why is breaking in the customer experience. The qualitative aspects, there are actually two or three things, right? One is the contact center is a gold mine of information, especially from that first level, right? Not the delight level, but the great customer experience level. You really going into the data there to understand what are the most common issues, what are the most common queries, gives you a clear understanding of what is it that the customer is valuing in the experience that you're providing, right? And what is it that you are breaking also. So it gives you both aspects of it in terms of specific points to attack, right? You could do like an overall understanding and say that, hey, you know what, my return experience seems to be really bad because a lot of people are complaining about my return experience. Or you could say that my payment experience is bad. A lot of people are saying I'm not able to use certain things in my payment experience. Different points could come out from there, which will give you the more qualitative aspects of what it is that is breaking experience. Interviews and inciting, of course, always available. Something which is good to do to understand in depth what is happening with the customer. The third, which is the total boon of the online space, right, is experimentation, which is you have hypotheses which you can experiment in very small pockets, right? It is possible to do that today because one, it's easy to set up, it doesn't take a lot of time. Second is you can cohort customers and you can target your experiments to very small cohorts, and you can do ABs, right? So create bunches of hypotheses, say that this is maybe why this customer is not doing this, and just experiment with it and see, right? So that's also another way to identify what exactly is breaking in the customer experience. So that was, I think, a follow up to the previous question. The next question, I think it's always about the small things, right? And when it comes to experience, I don't think that there is a silver bullet which kind of answers. You'll do one thing and then your experience is just going to get great from the next time. There will be some few things in your businesses which will make that impact, right? And that will be core to your proposition. But on an ongoing basis, when you talk about operations and how it impacts experience, it's never a single thing. For me, it's doing small things over a period of time, and then the it comes together in a way that the whole is larger than the sum of the parts, right? And it did happen to me when I was at Myntra as well, where we were just grinding along grinding along, and then suddenly after about say 12 to 14 months of work, the NPS trend line actually shifted, like the baseline shifted, and it started trending along us, 3 or 4 points higher. There was no way to explain it, right? It's just that you do so many of these experiments and so many of these changes over time, that as a whole more number of customers are ending up in the satisfied bucket rather than the neutral or the unsatisfied bucket, right? So I'll take a specific example as well. So one of the things we used to face at Mintra is wrong products were getting shipped to customers, right? And it's one of the poorest experiences there is. You open the packet and you get the product which you did not order. And it's also very difficult to return because the person will come back and then they will say that, but this is not the product that you ordered, so you're trying to defraud me and give me a different product. So that cycle and loop also becomes very painful. So, just want to check with the group what thoughts, ideas you would have to actually reduce the instances of wrong products being shipped to customers, and how would you fix this experience? Just imagine, a warehouse, someone packing products, someone shipping products. So primarily, this issue revolves around the warehouse, right? Because it's not really a shipping problem; it is a warehouse problem. So if I were to ask a more specific question, it would be, what are the kind of changes you would do at the warehouse to kind of fix this issue? The second is, what are potentially some changes you could do in your return process, which could fix the experience once a wrong product has been delivered. So it is about actually looking at the entire process from the time it enters the warehouse to the time it's delivered to the customer. Inward quality checks are important. Is the vendor actually sending the same product that he said he's going to send? So stickering improvements, if there are barcode issues, then again at the inward process you actually make sure that your stickering is right. Then after that, when you actually, so one of the things which was maybe specific in a retailer scenario was that people were ordering multiple products in the same order, and when the products were put together in a packet, sometimes the wrong product would be would be put in, right? So one of the things we did, which was maybe different from what we just discussed, is that there was a consolidation step which was introduced, right? Where actually all the products don't reach the packing desk and then they are packed together. They're actually banded together in a step before. So between picking and packing, a step was introduced, which is a consolidation step, which is an additional check to make sure that these are the products which are supposed to go together. So then the packing desk doesn't actually have to check if these are going together, and then they just go into the process of packing it so wrong products don't get into the system. So that's all the checks which you can do. The video is also something which we definitely introduced, but not in terms of inline quality check. I don't think that we've gotten to the point where we can stop the production packing line and say that, hey, you're packing the wrong product, but more as post facto check, right? Which is what helps in that problem which you brought up as well, Rohit, which is what happens if the product left the warehouse fine and actually it ended up reaching the customer wrong. So when a case like this comes up, one is do that information closing that information loop, right? Which one of the folks spoke about, which is if the customer has placed a return for a wrong product, then the checks regarding that should be completed before the executive actually goes to pick the product up. So that what we used to call it was green channeling. Basically, you say that this is a problematic return, and now I have assessed the case with the video at the warehouse, etc., etc., and I'm saying that we sent the wrong product. So let me go and pick it up, right? So that loop is closed, and then you pick it up without any questions. It's a no questions asked return, right? Now, when it comes to the specific issue which you spoke about, it's a lot harder, right? Because you will then find out that the product has been shipped right from the warehouse, but the customer is then saying that they have received the wrong product. This is a bit more probabilistic in nature, where you then look at the customer's history and you do customer risk profiling. You could potentially do a delivery executive or distribution center risk profiling as well, to say that are these cases, is this a customer problem or a distribution center problem? It's probabilistic, right? And then based on that you take a decision saying that, hey, this is likely that it's a customer who's been trying to defraud us, he's done this some 3 times in the past, and then you say I will not do this return for this customer. Or you might identify that the distribution center generally tends to have these problems and I'm not able to manage that very well, so maybe the customer is right. So it's a maybe game. So you kind of end up at that situation. When we were at Myntra, we were facing a lot of issues in terms of bad returns, which is people use the products and then they return it. And one is obviously the answer which I already gave, which is customer profiling, right? Which is to understand, is this what is you look at different factors, right? You look at what percentage of returns which I received from this customer in the past are bad. What is their general return trend? Are they returning within 1 or 2 days, or they generally tend to return in 10 or 15 days, right? So these are some of the factors you check to see whether this customer is or is not genuine, or is this issue not is or is not genuine.
This is super interesting because it's almost as if, you have product X, customer behavior X, supply chain. So it's like a into set of multiplicities, for
Yeah.
all of which different rules and processes and systems, maybe not manually, but in an automated system, have to constantly be built and be automated, right? And then the ops has to change at the back end to sort of account for all of this. This is actually quite crazy. I think this is like incredibly complex, and the fact that this happens so seamlessly, at a scale of like millions and millions of orders per day, per week, per month, per year, is just absolutely crazy, right?
I
And
don't, I don't think it's very seamless. I think it's quite chaotic. It just it's like the duck which is on the surface of the water, right? There's like furious paddling underneath, and then it's like serenely swimming around. That's the case here.
one question that just came to mind, right, is, and I think especially from this conversation about the company, the customer, right? You don't ever want to have a brand and a customer in an adversarial situation, but at the same time, you need to ensure that if the customer is not right here, that you manage to effectively handle that, right? So maybe just trying to understand, like, there is always this adage that no, the customer is always right. If we lose the business right now, we are giving up on LTV. So let's take this hit and focus on the next delivery. But there is probably going to a point of time, and maybe probabilistically so, where you decide that, hey, it's not worth it anymore, right? I think even understanding that, there is a point beyond which the brand needs to maybe stop. The brand needs to understand, right, that this is a hole that we're getting into, as opposed to a mine that we're looking to harvest from continuously. Just maybe tell us a little bit about how you make these trade-offs, right, of deciding when you drop a customer and say, hey, I'm not going to service you anymore because I'm very, very sure that you're the person who's wrong here, and this has been happening for a while. How
Yeah,
does a brand make that
actually,
choice?
as you were speaking, it connects back to what the thread that I lost, right? When I said that we were getting a lot of bad returns. One of the reasons we identified was that we had a 30-day no questions asked return policy. So now that is what Myntra's policy was till maybe about 2 years back, if I'm not mistaken. And now that policy is actually fundamentally changed. So if you actually go to the website, you will find that they no longer promise 30 days hassle free returns. So that is the kind of change which you will make. And that is actually pointing towards what you just spoke about, right? Which is not a particular person, but at an overall level, customers have been used to, like for almost a decade, they've been used to 30 days hassle free returns. And then you're deciding to make the experience poorer for everybody by saying, I will not do it. But those are some strategic calls you do take, right? You're like that cost which is happening because of the returns which are happening, say, beyond 10 days or beyond 12 days almost always is used in bad returns. Then you're like the customer is taking this policy for a ride. They're taking the company for a ride. They're like, I will use this 30 days hassle free policy to actually use the products and give it back, right? At a policy level or at a more overall level as well, you need to make these choices. I think it does come down to whether um, there is benefit to that cost which you're incurring, right? And the assessment which we made at that point was that the benefit is not sufficient, which is that this customer, I will probably lose them because there is no 30-day return, that conversion may drop or that retention may drop. But what I'm losing in terms of cogs in the products that are going to waste, which I cannot use again, is that the cost benefit just doesn't work, right? And it is sort of that cost benefit which you have to apply at a customer level as well. It is not an overarching theme to say all customers will give you an average LTV. That's the point here, right? Every customer gives you their own LTV, and it's not just about LTV, it's about the profit they generate for you. Now, if over time you find that a customer is buying a lot, so they're giving you a lot of top line, but they're actually consuming a lot more, and it's detrimental for me to service this customer, then you start adding checks and balances, right? So a few things which you do is you don't start by blacklisting a customer for behavior unless it is continuous fraud, that they're returning the products, they're returning fake Nikes, for example, right? They ordered real Nikes, returned fake Nikes. Those are customer behaviors which you would directly penalize by saying blacklisting. But usually you will follow a few steps, right? First is you will introduce a certain fee for those behaviors. Now, if a customer is very prone to returning and they're actually buying 10 products and keeping one, then you start adding a delivery fee or a platform fee for them. You start adding return fees for them. So you start by some penalization for the behaviors that you find are not right, and then you move on and go down the path to then the final step of, say, blacklisting a customer because they really are not right for you to serve. Now, the other flip side to it is managing backlash, right? And in a lot of these cases, there are situations where you're like, I know I'm right, and the customer is wrong, and but they then go on to social media with their own stories and then talk about how the company has defrauded them, right? That's nuanced. It is about how well your customer experience team or the customer complaint team is trained to answer these questions. I think the first thing is basically removing it from the public scrutiny, which is how do you calm the customer down and tell them that let's take this one on one, let's not talk about this in a public forum, and then figuring out how to resolve this issue, right? And in a lot of cases, um, there is a lot of miscommunication. I think in 90% of the cases, even the customers are not malicious. It's more that they have not understood why something has not happened. So dealing with it correctly usually resolves the issue. There are 10% cases where honestly the customer is just out to get you, right? And as and Rohit, like you said, it's not that the customer is always king. There are people out there who are doing these things, right? And in that situation, you either capitulate or threaten legal action and then resolve it. So in some cases you just capitulate, right? You're like, I know I'm right, but I know that you are going to create this problem, so I'm just going to take this as a cost and move on. So I hope that answers the question.
No, I think that answers it brilliantly. And I was just reflecting on your point about friction, right? Look, like, for example, Amazon makes it really, really hard to connect with anybody in the customer success team to process a return, to do anything, right? I remember I ordered something by mistake and there was just no way to give it back. And sure, in a way and form, um, it sucked. It wasn't great that I couldn't return something that I had ordered. But candidly, the fault was mine, right? Because I made a wrong selection when I ordered something. It was book
Yeah,
A, I ordered book B. Maybe some of these things, right? Like knowing that, hey, if you make this mistake, the platform will not compensate you. It will not support you. And I don't think they did that on day one. I mean, when I started using Amazon, it wasn't like this. They would just do whatever, etc., etc. But over a period of time, as you said, they started adding some of these penalties. They started deliberately increasing friction in specific places.
yeah.
Maybe Himanshu, that also adds to your point in some ways, to drive the customer behavior, in a certain manner, to ease the operational overhead and burden, and to sort of put the onus back on the customer that, hey, we told you, you knew that this would happen, so now you can't come and complain to us about it, right? It also makes it really hard for me to go and rage about this on social media, because the response is simply, hey, you ordered the wrong thing, it's your problem,
Exactly.
right? Which makes me look really silly if I want to go and rage
Yeah.
about it.
Exactly,
So
right? Again, it comes down to the promise. Is like if your promise includes a 30-day hassle-free return, then yeah, you better do the 30-day hassle-free return. But if your promise is clearly stated on the product page saying it's non-returnable, then that is the right customer experience, right? Just because I want the moon does not mean that I get it. It is what I have promised that you will get. I can say that I want this Louis Vuitton bag for 1,000 rupees. No one's gonna give it to me, right? So, yeah.
I think on this particular topic, we have actually come a long way in as e-commerce has been growing, as customer experience has been something that everything revolves around, right? A growing trend that we are seeing is the transparency of business that is happening, right? So if I have to take an example, right, maybe around 10 years ago, when Flipkart was initially shipping out orders, they would just say, okay, your order is placed, you'll get your order in 10 days. Between those 10 days, you don't know what's happening. You don't know when you'll get your order. Your order might come in 10 days, it might be 8 days, it might be 15 days. You don't know. You just have to sit and wait. But come a few more years, you have the update on your order has reached the warehouse. It has reached your nearest delivery hub. So that transparency was something that was introduced. And I think that was something that arose from customer expectations, right? They want to know where the order is. It might also be something that was
So I'll
driven
actually
by,
link that back, right, Swagata? Why
yeah,
those messages started is because someone went to the contact center and saw what are the queries which are coming in. So
right,
most at that time, the top query would have been, "Where is my order?" Today, that will
right.
not be your top query because that loop has been closed and the customer is now aware. So that's how you make those improvements as well.
But at the same time, I think like while this would be something that the customer would really want, this is also something that adds additional pressure on the operator, right? Because you now have the expectation to deal with that. Suppose we have something like a Instamart or a Zepto, right? These days,
I was just going to say, now the promises are 10 minutes.
yeah. So the promises are 10 minutes, but at the same time, Instamart like shows you the live location while Zepto does not. So
Yeah.
that's a decision that they took, and that's something that they did. So I just want to know here that when do brands make this decision? How do they do it? Like, how are the discussions there between the possible trade-offs that are going to happen, the operational challenges that you're going to face in giving this information transparency to the customer, right?
Hmm. I think it does go back to I think my answer is what I already said, right? Which is that is this what is going to be the largest issue which is coming up for the customer? In a 10-minute scenario, I actually don't think it is, right? So if the way the conversation probably happened at Zepto is that in that 10 minutes, they would first check how many of their orders are they able to deliver in 10 minutes, right? If that number is say above 90%, they're like for 90% of the customers, they are not going to wonder in that 10 minutes saying that where is my order, right? For the last 10% of the customers, yes, they are going to wonder where is their order, right? Which is how well are you able to stick to that promise? If you're able to stick to that promise well, then nobody's going to wonder in between, right? It is 10 minutes. So they would have said that, let me not provide this information because it's not something the customer is looking for. Now, if you're on the other hand, if you are not sure of how well you can adhere to that promise, you would say that, you know what, I know that in 30% of the cases, after 10 or 15 minutes, the customer is going to message me and ask me where is the order, right? Because they don't know where it is because it was supposed to be delivered in 10 minutes. Then you choose to make it transparent because then they can go see it. They'll be like, okay, they said 10 minutes, but I know the person is like 2 minutes away from my house. So I'm not really commenting on the internal operational efficiencies of either company. I want to make that clear. But I'm saying that that would be one of the ways in which I would make this decision, right? Which is that a useful question to answer for the customer? If I'm delivering on my promise, no. If I'm not, then yes.
Awesome. I think before we sort of get towards the end of the session, maybe open it up to any questions that folks had to ask. There is one thing that even when we were discussing in the community, what people would like to understand. They wanted to understand how do you sort of build a team, right? How do you equip a team? You spoke about training, skills, the contact center, the delivery person, right? All of these people who are engaging with the customer at different touch points have a direct impact, right? If the delivery executive argues with you, it's going to be a horrible customer experience. If the contact center doesn't get back to you, it's going to be a horrible customer experience. But at the same time, I think it's fairly well understood that the CX folks who are at the contact center, the delivery folks who are coming to deliver the order, they also often face the brunt, right, of the dissatisfaction of the customer, even though they probably had the least to do with it because the problem was somewhere else, that they probably didn't even have anything to do with at all. So on two fronts, right? One, how do you think about building team, training people, creating capability for operations excellence in this whole customer excellence and customer success space? And the second piece is, is burnout something in this space that becomes very, very important to manage? Is employee morale something that becomes very, very important to manage when, sort of working on customer experience?
So I'm assuming that the second part of your question is a bit more to do with specifically the delivery folks and the contact center executive.
Exactly. So,
The first
so
part of
that's
the
the
question
second part.
I'll answer in more in general, right? I think one of the definitions of customer experience that I absolutely hate is that it is the contact center, right? When you talk to a lot of people, when you say that you work in customer experience, their immediate question is, are you managing the customer experience center or contact center? It is a very critical part of the experience loop, right? But it is actually technically the last resort, which is that your experience was not right, so somebody had to come there and then their issue had to be resolved, right? So I would call it a customer experience rescue center and not a customer experience center, right? So customer experience is something which is delivered by the entire organization, which is what I said in the beginning, right? Be it any part of the organizations, and since we're talking about ops in specific, I think it comes back to measurement and metrics, which is surveys, NPS, all of that is esoteric, right? Which is that somebody will publish a number saying that our customer satisfaction score, in whichever way you measure it, is X, and it has improved from X to Y. What I did to impact it sitting wherever I am, I have absolutely no idea, right? I think the first thing in terms of building teams is to identify those two or three metrics of customer experience which you are impacting, right? In that first mile experience example I spoke about before, it is basically allocation, right? And it's a term called regional utilization, which is how many of your orders are getting delivered from a warehouse which is closest to that customer. So that is a percentage number, right? And that is a hard metric, which is actually very close to customer experience, but is understandable, well understood, and can be easily explained to operational folks, right? So I think it's important to kind of break it down from an overall satisfaction metric to specific metrics people impact. Otherwise it becomes more conceptual in nature, right? And how to build teams around it, it is quite cultural, but having monitoring of these first identifying and defining these metrics, and then monitoring these metrics is one way, definitely. The second is actually to think about adding one question in any kind of strategic or design questions that you're trying to answer, right? Which is, how is this going to impact the customer? I am not even saying the question should be, am I making the customer's life better? But I think a question should be asked to say, am I making it worse, right? And I make a change, and is this going to impact the customer positively or negatively? Is again something which should be part of the way we discuss changes, discuss improvements, and so on. These are two things which I have helped me in the past in terms of aligning the larger organization towards customer experience goals, right? Second part of the question, in terms of the burnout, it is difficult because the expectation, as you said, of that particular person is to resolve questions which they did for no fault of their own. It is the organization which has made some sort of error, or the customer themselves also, as we spoke. But they're the ones who need to figure out and manage this, right? I think the right resolution mechanisms within the organization are critical here, which is that if the contact center or the customer experience center has raised a particular issue, who are the partner teams within, say, the larger organization? Like, for example, payments failed. Now, uh, the customer has made the payment, they have not got a refund, it is basically stuck in, I don't know, some sort of ether limbo, right? uh, where it just disappeared. Now there has to be dedicated POCs within each different team who can answer these questions, which is how you manage it within the org. So in the payments team, there will be a person who says that, okay, these are the 10 payments which seem to have disappeared into thin air. I now need to dig deeper with the bank, with the payment gateway, to figure out where that money is gone and then return it to the customer, right? The thing with customer experience, solving customer experience issues, right? It is not a law of averages. It is not at an overall level, I'm going to solve this. Those are strategies, decisions, and all of that. Rescuing customer experience is a painful line by line job, which is that every line needs to be investigated and discussed, and the issues need to be resolved. It's the same case on the supply chain side, right? You will say that this packet is lost. The customer, we say we've delivered it, the customer says they never received it. Now there is no way for me to sit at a head office and decide what the answer there is. Someone needs to actually go ask questions, identify what has happened on the ground, and then resolve those issues. So those POCs in the respective parts of the organization are super critical.
Got it. So, I mean, I think my key takeaway from this is that, all of these design aspects, right, of how these different teams internally are talking to each other. And I think what you said very importantly, that the supply chain team or somebody who's packing stuff in a warehouse right? The out process metric of on time in full delivery is vague, right? It's not something that they can directly contribute to, but they can contribute to ensuring that they pack the right order, or that the supply chain team ensured that the right products were stocked in the right place. And
Correct.
it's really about looking at in process metrics, and then instilling that degree of cultural expectation in the org that, hey, whatever we are doing, all of that ultimately goes ahead and impacts the customer. These are not disjoint. It's not vague. It's very real, and it's very meaningful in our community. As we were talking in the last few days, so somebody mentioned that they'd gone to rent a car as they were on vacation somewhere, and they both of them couldn't drive manual. They wanted an automatic vehicle necessarily. However, I think they'd made a mistake or something of that sort, where they'd actually booked a manual. So when they went to the showroom or the rental space, and they said ki, hey, aisa galti ho gaya, this has gone wrong, we can't even drive this car because we don't know how. They said that basically the store manager who was running it, he or she was able to very quickly check, okay, do I have an automatic car available? Okay, at a nominal additional cost or no additional cost, I'm just going to allot an automatic to you. It didn't require them to call 4 or 5 levels up and waste like an hour, 2 hours, or just argue with the customer saying, no, you've done this, so you have to do this, etc. Right? It was important for them. They recognize, right? Like, this is a really big part of the customer's holiday experience. They're renting a car for 30,000-40,000 rupees for a period of 4, 5, 6 days. And not delivering on this switch is going to be terrible. So I am empowered to make this decision. Sure, I will have to explain, send a note to management that, hey, I've done this. The system will take my record, but I can make this switch, right? So this is, maybe an example to maybe ground what Himanshu was saying, right? Like that are people at different levels empowered to make switches, to make decisions within their sphere of influence that can directly impact customers.
Yeah. No, I absolutely think that you have to, right? I think that there are certain degrees of freedom which are required at every level. Can you make a decision that I am going to accept this iPhone return? Probably not, right? But can you make a decision saying that this 300 rupee thing actually arrived broken for the customer? Can I replace it? So there are degrees of freedom which are required at every level, and I think it is very important that people be allowed to make those decisions for the betterment of customer experience. Implementing this though is not easy at all. It again goes to a line by line understanding of what issues can come up, and giving the proper resolution, right? And sometimes you'll get tears in your eyes when you look at the number of lines of SOPs which exist in a contact center, right? Literally, you will write about every issue. You will write about what is the level of freedom which is allowed and what is not allowed, and who is allowed to then take the decision on making this thing on behalf of the customer, right? Now, identifying what is important to the customer at that point becomes critical, which is that, like in the example you mentioned, that manual versus automatic seems to have been a critical point, is a critical point in the journey, right? And that's what they've identified and said that there's a degree of freedom that I will allow. Now, if someone says that, hey, I want to get upgraded to a Range Rover, that is not a decision which is allowed at that point, right? So I think that freedom as well as the restrictions are both important, because otherwise you will not be able to control what is happening at that location, right? So it is, the devil is in the detail in terms of executing or doing something like this for an empowered organization. uh, you will get to say a 90% of all your issues, and you have those SOPs for the 90% issues. For the 10% of the issues, you create the next level, because the first level doesn't have the answers, right? They do not know how to deal with a particular issue. You deal the next level, who are a little bit more empowered to make creative decisions, right? You say that there is a certain amount of freedom, and I'm allowing you because you are more senior and I trust you to to have better judgment. So you give a higher degree of freedom to that, and then there will be certain things which have to be approved by the COO or the CEO, right? So I think it's about defining it at that level, and that needs to be done for this to actually work smoothly. Because otherwise, what will happen is that in one store, in the example you mentioned, in one store you will have that experience, and in another store you will have a different one, because it will not be consistent. It won't be a consistent experience if it is not documented. I think I gave the most boring answer to this, but that is the answer, right? Which is, you have to define the processes at that level, and it happens.
No, completely agree, right? I think we had this thing when I was at PNG that if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Or it doesn't happen effectively. And it's striking that so much of what I've seen on the shop floor in a manufacturing setup is very, very similar,
Yeah,
to e-commerce, to
absolutely.
retail, to all of these things. A lot of the cultural aspects, the process aspects are very similar, right? Even there, like you had a quality hold, you decide you have to scrap material. Okay, up to say 50,000 rupees worth of scrap as the department manager, I can decide that, okay, this is bad product, let's get rid of it. Goes up to 5 lakhs, my boss needs to take a decision. Goes up to 50 lakhs, is the plant manager's decision, right? 5 crores, the supply chain head is going to be involved, is going to lead to very, very uncomfortable questions for why that's happened. So
Yeah.
completely understand that the escalation matrix needs to be built, and it needs to be built off of something real, which is understanding the data, how likely things are going to happen, and then what
Every issue.
losses
Yeah.
you can afford to also allow the organization to
Yeah.
take. I think we're almost at the end of this conversation, so there's maybe just a couple of questions that I have left, and I'm just going to try and club them into one. So, you've had a long career now on the operations, X customer X revenue growth. Mostly looking at digital brands, e-commerce, all of this throughout your career. In general, right? I think it's a field that a lot of people are doing more and more work in. People are more and more interested. More and more of the brands and anything customer facing, anything retail is moving, into this sort of space. So, it's an open-ended question. Is there anything that, you reflect on that really, really contributed to your journey, right? Your ways of working, principles that you've built over the last several years at these organizations that, you would ask people here in this call to think about and maybe take away as they look at building their careers.
Yeah. No, see, operations, it's actually a generalist role, right? It's like anything which you can't logically bucket into something else gets bucketed into operations, which is happening with me right now, right? Like this last week, I was having a conversation with the CEO where he's like, Sulakshana, I think you can take care of this as well. I'm like, why? But because it generally didn't have a home anywhere else, and he's like, hey, you're the CEO, so why don't you do it, right? So that tends to happen with operations a fair bit. So I would say, I think that is something which you need to develop, right? Because I think that the definition of operations will change from organization to organization. So being flexible and getting a wide variety of experiences is important. Doing different roles within the same organization is also important. I'm not suggesting that we jump job from job to get those new experiences, but shifting your perspective within the organization also gives you that flexibility. To me, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning, right? You can choose certain phases in your life where you're like, something else is more important, so I'm going to step off the accelerator on this, and that's perfectly all right, and I've done that a few times. But if you're on that path and you've decided that this is my learning phase and I want to see what I can do next, being comfortable is not your friend, right? You need to put yourself in uncomfortable situations and learn more. um, the other thing with operations in specific, right, is it requires a fair amount of patience. There isn't something, a category management, revenue side, which also I have done. Especially in the digital space, it is immediate, right? There are a bunch of things which you can do, which from tomorrow will help you change something. But operations isn't like that. Fundamental true ops improvements take time, and that patience should definitely be there. And what people are looking for and how to excel in an operations role, right, is not by delivering on what is expected of you on a daily basis, but actually putting in those ideas and that effort to doing something which changes the baseline in 6 months, right? um, am I is my warehouse operating today at capacity is one question, right? But 6 months from now, can I actually fundamentally change the productivity of the employees in the warehouse is a different question. And growing in operations is actually continuously thinking about what that is and how you have moved that baseline. Is not delivering your daily targets. The other thing is, I think, talking to a lot of people. I think I am not much of a reader, so I have not read a lot of books on these kind of subjects. But I have spoken to a lot of people who have done this before, who are probably within the organization, outside the organization. I just love having exploratory chats. to figure out what happens. Experimentation, which I already spoke about, try and find a few things and hypotheses which you can keep testing, which will also help you figure out what those needle movers are, right? And the last one is actually staying curious. I think it's very important when you see something is happening to a metric, when you're seeing something which is different from before, whether it is for a day, whether it is for a week, spending that extra 15 minutes to dig into what happened will really open up avenues and perspectives, right? I think that curiosity, especially in the operation space, is very, very important to say, why did something happen? Is there a learning I can get out of it? Which you'll then just pocket away, right? You may not be able to use it, but those insights are what you build over time. And once you've done it for about 8 to 10 months, you'll be like, oh, these things are connecting, right? That curiosity helps you create that understanding and then connect dots, which will help you make things better.
No, this was absolutely awesome. I think we are all out of time, but thank you so much for this. I hope that everybody who's been on this call, irrespective of whether they're practicing or interested in ops, I think from this session you've clearly taken away that ops matters, which has been the objective of all of these series of speaker sessions that we've been doing. Thank you everyone for joining us, for taking out the time on a Saturday morning. And Sulakshana, this was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for spending the time and really, really offering a masterclass on how some of these things are done. And I think everyone here on this call is a lot wiser than they were before they attended it. I for sure am. And it was brilliant to have you. Thank you so much once again.
I'm very glad to, very glad that you invited me. Happy to have done this. And I think interesting questions as well, right? And I think this group is staying curious. So I would say just continue that.